Afternoon, I call this meeting to order. Today we'll consider three bills: S-2785, the Tribal Youth and Community Protection Act; S-2920, the Tribal Law and Order Reauthorization Act; and S-3014, the Tribal Forestry Participation and Protection Act. These bills are intended to improve the safety of Indian communities, children, and resources. S-2785 was introduced by Senators Tester and Franken. Senator Udall and Cantwell have joined as co-sponsors. This bill would protect Native children and promote public safety in tribal communities by extending tribal criminal jurisdiction in the same manner under the special domestic violence provision as in the Violence Against Women Reauthorization of 2013. Under S-2785, violent offenses and attempted violent offenses against Indian children, as well as violent offenses and attempted violent offenses against tribal police and tribal court personnel conducting tribal criminal proceedings, would all have expanded criminal prosecution. Additionally, 2785 would also expand tribal jurisdiction to prosecute drug offenses. The committee held a legislative hearing on May 18th. Vice Chairman Tester has filed an amendment. That amendment provides for clarification on certain key terms within S-2785. In addition, Senator Lankford has filed an amendment to S-2785, which I'll ask him to talk about momentarily. I appreciate Senator Tester's leadership on addressing the issues in this piece of legislation. The bill includes creative approaches to prevent, prosecute, and punish these crimes, which are far too prevalent in Indian communities. I think there are a few provisions in the bill that still require some additional work. The expansion of the Oliphant fix in the bill may have the potential of impeding the bill's progress for a number of reasons. I still have some questions if this fix will help the tribes that lack the resources to incarcerate all of the perpetrators over whom they already have jurisdiction today. Having said that, there are enough good provisions in the bill to keep this bill moving. As we all know, drugs are plaguing our tribal communities, and honestly, we know that there aren't enough resources to get the job done. I remember at the legislative hearing on this bill, Senator Heitkamp asked both the Department of Justice and the Department of Interior witnesses whose job was it to enforce drug laws. Both witnesses said it was their responsibility, but their department's inaction following the hearings does speak volumes. If the Department of Justice is going to turn a blind eye and not enforce Title 21 of the U.S. Criminal Code, including drug crimes, including marijuana, then we should give the tools to the tribal communities. Again, Senator, I look forward to working with you in our continued efforts to address a problem that plagues so many of our Native communities. S-2920 is a bill I introduced along with Senator McCain. This bill would reauthorize the Tribal Law and Order Act of 2010. The committee held a legislative hearing in May, and I filed amendments to this bill. The substitute amendment that I will be offering today is based on feedback from the Department of Justice and Interior, the Federal Defenders Organization, and the National Congress of Indian Americans and Other Tribes. As I stated at that hearing, these provisions are intended to provide enhancements that we can get enacted this year. Several of these amendments are intended to improve services to reduce recidivism, prevent additional crimes, and for current inmates to assist in preventing them from ultimately ending up in federal prison. It's troubling that the Bureau of Indian Affairs is not assisted by these other agencies who have the expertise needed by the BIA and the tribes. Senator McCain has also filed an amendment, which I will ask him to talk about momentarily. Finally, the committee will consider S-3014, the Tribal Forestry Participation and Protection Act, a bill introduced by Senator Daines. This bill would increase interagency forest management between the tribes and the Department of Agriculture and the Interior to ensure and improve protection of tribal trust forests and resources. The committee held a legislative hearing in June. There are three amendments filed, one from Senator Daines, one from Senator Tester, and I have one filed. The amendment I am offering, 16524, would clarify that secretarial orders related to specific wildlife conservation matters do not supersede existing tribal consultation requirements. The amendment also requires the Department of Interior to file a report with this committee and with the House Committee on Natural Resources regarding the way the agency prioritizes Indian forest land compared to other resources when allocating certain federal wildfire suppression funds and assets during a fire. I will shortly turn to Senator Daines to talk about his bill, but before we do, I'd ask Vice Chairman Tester if he has an opening statement.
I do, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this business meeting to discuss these three bills. S-2785, the Tribal Youth and Community Protection Act, is a bill that I introduced with Senator Franken and with Senators Udall and Cantwell as co-sponsors. The bill would build upon VAWA 2013 by reaffirming tribes' ability to protect their communities. Under the bill, tribes could better protect children from violence, their law enforcement officers while on the job, entire reservation from the scourge of drug crimes. Tribal members need to be able to feel safe when they're in their tribal communities. However, we've heard time and time again dire statistics about crime and victimization on reservations, and for more than 30 years, tribes have had to rely on law enforcement and courts from outside their communities for protection. It's pretty clear the system has not worked. This bill would empower tribes to take on a greater role in policing their reservations. This will ensure that safety initiatives by law enforcement and courts reflect the values, concerns, and priorities of each community, as the bill would promote tribes rather than outside agencies having a primary in day-to-day criminal justice matters. I want to thank the chairman for putting my bill on the agenda and ask my colleagues for the support in reporting it out of committee. Along those same lines, I appreciate the chairman's efforts to reauthorize many of the public safety initiatives first acted in the Tribal Law and Order Act. I think we've made some progress since TULA was enacted in 2010, and I agree these provisions need to be updated. I also want to say a few short words about S3014. I want to start by thanking Senator Daines for working on an issue that is very important. I want to thank him for his staff working with my staff to address some of the concerns that I had. Despite the changes, I'm still concerned that some of the issues identified at our legislative hearing 2 weeks ago have yet to be addressed. I know the affected agencies have not been able to provide technical drafting assistance that would clear up the roles each agency involved would have under the bill. And without clarity on this and other issues, I'm concerned this bill would not be implemented by the agencies in a way that would help tribes achieve the goals in forest management. For those reasons, I have filed an amendment to S3014. I will withdraw that amendment, but I look forward to working with all of my colleagues and tribes to find solutions on tribal forestry. Once again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this business meeting.
Thank you, Senator Tester. Let's go to that bill, and then when we get to the next one, I'll ask Senator Daines to comment on his piece of legislation. So we'll now take up S2785, the Tribal Youth and Community Protection Act. 2 amendments have been filed. The committee held a legislative hearing in May. First amendment filed by Senator Tester, RYA 16534. Is there a motion to consider the amendment?
I would move that amendment.
A second. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the amendment passes. Second amendment has been filed by Senator Langford. The amendment is MCC 16512. Senator Langford would like to speak on the amendment.
I would, actually. I'm sure it'll move just as quickly as the previous amendment just moved as well. Let me just bring up a couple of things on this. On countless occasions, this committee has heard testimony about the destructive impact of illegal drugs in Indian country. We've had, I think, 3 hearings just this session on drug issues here. The rate for American Indians and Alaska Natives for their youth is the highest in the country by far. 56% of 8th graders in Indian country are using marijuana. 56%. That is 3 times higher than the national average for anywhere else. Exactly 1 year ago this week, we heard testimony right here in this room about the tragically high suicide rates in Indian country. At that time, Chairman of the Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians testified that to solve the high suicide rates in Indian country, we need to first fix the drug addiction issues that are destroying the lives and families on the reservations. I've yet to meet anyone that has been able to say to me, if only our Native American kids smoke more marijuana, if only their parents smoked more marijuana, then outcomes would be better in the reservations. No one has been able to say to me, we'll have greater employment, we'll have greater educational outcomes, we'll have stronger families if only we produced more marijuana in Indian country. So my amendment's pretty straightforward, where we're dealing with the drug issues, which are profound there and we need to engage on. I believe that we have a responsibility as members of this committee and as a federal government to fulfill our trust responsibilities. Now, these tribes have sovereignty, and I completely honor that sovereignty. And I'm a very outspoken advocate for sovereignty of the tribes, both in the tribes that are non-reservation in my state and reservations around the country. But existing federal law already prohibits the cultivation and distribution of marijuana. This is not something new. This is enforcing existing federal law around the country. And so my amendment's very straightforward, that we do not allow on tribal areas the cultivation, distribution of marijuana, and that we send a message to all tribes, we want to work with you to eradicate marijuana, not to multiply it into tribal areas, because the outcomes are better for children and for the communities with that. So that is my amendment that I'd like to be able to add to this as we're dealing with drug issues in tribal areas.
Well, thank you, Senator Langford. I understand why you filed this amendment. You are troubled, like I am, with marijuana use in this country, especially with the rise in narcotic use on tribal lands. This committee has held 3 hearings on narcotic use, and I do not believe any of the witnesses said drugs or marijuana use is positive. Quite the opposite. There's absolutely a balance between respecting tribal sovereignty and the federal government trust responsibility to provide health care. The committee understands that. But putting those fundamental issues aside, the one issue that is factually true, marijuana is a highly addictive drug, and I see more detriment than benefit from its use. So at this time, do any other members of the committee wish to speak about Senator Langford's amendment? Senator Tester.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Senator Langford for bringing this amendment up because I know it's in the best interest of the tribes and the Indian people that he brings it forth. And I would also say that I'm not somebody that wants wholesale legalization of marijuana in this country. But there are 2 issues. One of them is the sovereignty issue, and I'll tell you what it is. And correct me if I'm wrong, Senator. It says that if they do this, all money is cut off. And that really is a different standard than we use for states like Washington or Colorado. You're right, it's illegal, but we've never said if you do this, all farm program subsidies are going to cease, all housing subsidies are going to cease. So it does make it a little different. And then you touched on the issue of sovereignty. You understand sovereignty. I don't have to tell you about sovereignty. It becomes an issue. So it isn't really the same playing field for the states as it is for the reservations. But that being said, you're exactly right. Look, I think it's a bad move for reservations to promote growing of marijuana. I think it's a step in the wrong direction as far as drug use in Indian country. But we've got to get some of these issues solved, and I'd be more than happy to work with them going forward if this amendment doesn't pass.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And boy, this is a tough one for me. Senator Langford, I hear exactly what you're saying. And before I came to the Senate, much of my nonprofit private time was spent fighting legalization of marijuana in my state. We lost. And in 2015, we had an initiative before the voters in the state of Alaska. 53% voted to fully legalize the cultivation, the distribution, and the use of marijuana. And as much as I did not support that initiative, it's now the law in Alaska, and it's my obligation to figure out how we uphold that decision going forward, and that there is observance of all laws. I am concerned, though, that as well-intended as this amendment is, it goes beyond lands that are held in trust or restricted status by the federal government, because it expressly includes Alaska Native corporations and the fee lands that they hold. So that's about 44 million acres in the state of Alaska that we'd be talking about. Within the Native Land Claims Settlement Act, we expressly provide that these lands, as well as the activities on Native corporation lands, are to be regulated according to the laws of the state of Alaska. Back in 1998, there was a case, it was the Venati case, that said Alaska Native corporations were expressly excluded from the superintendent's provisions of the federal government. Venati then went on to conclusively say that ANCSA lands are not in Indian country. And as I look at your amendment, as it's written, it would return the use of ANCSA lands to federal superintendents, which is not the direction that we wish to go. I don't hear any Native corporations that have any interest in allowing their lands to be put into marijuana cultivation or use. But as I'm looking at this amendment, for us in Alaska, I think there's a bigger principle at stake here, and that's whether or not we subject the use of ANC lands to federal trust regulations. So regardless of whether or not I think marijuana is good, bad, it's a principal issue for us. So I'm going to reluctantly oppose your amendment, but I want you to know where I'm coming from on it. I so wish that we could be making greater headway. Your statistics about 53% of eighth graders, unfortunately, does not shock or surprise me. It saddens me.
Yes, we're going to go back and forth. I think Senator Schatz, you were next, and then Senator Hoven.
Very briefly, I wanted to agree with Senator Tester's concern about sovereignty. But the other point I'd like to make is that to the extent that we have data on what happens when you legalize marijuana in terms of especially young people using marijuana, the data shows in Colorado, the state of Washington, that the numbers either stay flat or go slightly down in places where you legalize marijuana. So even if your abiding concern is to reduce drug use generally, and even if you're willing to sort of overcome those sovereignty concerns, there's a question of whether or not this will actually work in terms of decreasing the rate of marijuana use. And I think it's worth watching these data pour in. We only have basically 2014 as legalization became real, and then a full year's 2015 for the state of Colorado, so it's probably not a complete data set. But let's keep our minds open to the very real possibility that legalization, normalization, decriminalization does not have the effect of increasing the percentage of young people who actually use the drug. It's possible that it will have this kind of counterintuitive effect, as has happened with tobacco and other things. So let's just keep our minds open as this debate continues and watch the data very carefully.
Thank you, Senator Schatz. Senator Hoven.
I want to express support for Senator Lankford's amendment, and I think he said it just right. I think that, we have to be careful that it does have an impact, and I know that's what he's trying to address, and I appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman.
Is there any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cantwell.
Thank you. In 2012, the voters of Washington State approved the use of recreational marijuana. So that law allows tribes in Washington State to enter a compact with the Liquor Control Board to sell recreational marijuana in tribally owned stores. Since then, the Suquamish and the Squaxin Island tribes have opened recreational marijuana stores with other tribes in compact negotiations. While I didn't support the state measure, I certainly support what the Washington voters decided, and they include tribal members. So I oppose the amendment based on the tribal sovereignty issues that have already been raised by individuals here.
Any additional discussion? Do we have a motion on MCC 16512? I'd entertain a motion. Is there a second? Senator Hoven?
Second.
Thank you. Any additional discussion? There being none, all those in favor of the Lankford Amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay.
No.
In the opinion of the chairs, the nays have it. The amendment does not pass. Do I have a motion to consider Bill S. 2785 as amended?
So moved.
A second? Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the bill as amended passes. We will now take up S. 2920, the Tribal Law and Order Reauthorization Act. In May of this year, I, along with Senator McCain, introduced the bill. There's a substitute amendment that I've filed, and I moved to consider that amendment. Is there a second? Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the amendment passes. Second amendment is filed by Senator McCain. Is there a motion to consider his amendment? Is there a second? Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The amendment passes. Now move to consider S. 2920 as amended. Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. In the opinion of chair, the amendment and the bill as amended passes. We'll now take up S. 3014, the Tribal Forestry Participation and Protection Act. Senator Daines introduced this piece of legislation in May. The bill would increase interagency forest management between the tribes, the Department of Agriculture, and the Interior Department. The committee held a legislative hearing in June. There were 3 amendments filed. Senator Daines, Senator Tester, And my own amendment, the amendment I am offering, would clarify and ensure that certain federal wildfire suppression activities do not supersede tribal interests. I would like to ask Senator Daines to speak about his bill and amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, as well as Vice Chairman Tester, for including S. 3014, the Tribal Forestry Participation and Protection Act, and its substitute amendment in today's business meeting. Before we get into the bill, I want to recognize and thank Leif Haugen here for coming today to the committee. Leif Haugen's from Indian country, Northern Cheyenne. He is one of the few Northern Cheyennes that really is a promoter of lutefisk out there, Leif, and so it's good to have you here. He serves as Executive Director of the Northern Cheyenne Tribal Housing Authority in Lame Deer, Montana. Thanks for making the trip, Leif. It's truly great to see you here. We're now at the precipice of fire season. We're already seeing glimpses of the devastating impacts these disasters will have. As I chat with Montanans, we're already starting to plan our summer calendars, and sometimes we tell friends that come to Montana, be careful in August because you may be seeing wildfire season, and it probably will not be an exception this year. This is one of the reasons I introduced this bill, which enjoys strong support from Montana tribes and will help reduce the risk of wildfires in both Indian as well as federal forested land. The substitute amendment, which I'm also offering today, incorporates suggestions from the Forest Service, from the BLM, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, as well as from member offices from both sides of this dais. Among its provisions, the amendment places further limitations on projects where the Secretaries of the Interior and Ag may treat federal forest land as Indian forest land. It also requires those departments to jointly develop an implementation plan in the new authorities that it does provide. So I appreciate Chairman Barrasso's amendment to this bill. It will help ensure tribal forestry is prioritized in accordance with the United States Trust responsibilities. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Daines. I now move to consider Senator Daines' amendment, RYA 16538. Is there a second? Any discussion? There being none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the amendment passes. Now move to consider my amendment. Is there a second? Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed by nay. The opinion of the chair, the amendment passes. Senator Tester, I understand you've chosen to withdraw your amendment, so I now move to consider S. 3014 as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our federal forests are an important natural resource, and they must be maintained and managed to ensure that they remain healthy. Tribes in Washington have been good partners in managing our federal land and good stewards of the valuable resource, and they are both a cultural pillar and an economic driver for many of our reservations. So I strongly support tribal sovereignty, and I believe the tribes should be given the tool to manage natural resources, but I have several concerns about this legislation. Under Senator Daines' legislation, the appropriate NEPA process would be hindered, and BIA would neither have the resources nor the expertise to ensure that they completed that process. Furthermore, the bill proposes unattainable NEPA timelines and flexibilities, and I have concerns that with the effect of Section 3 on collaborative project litigation bonding, these change in bonding will make it more difficult to ensure that a proper balance between conservation and the use of forest resources. Because of these issues, I want to be recorded no on this legislation.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Cantwell. I also want to note for the record that the amendment of mine that we voted on and considered and passed is amendment number RYA 16524. Now we'll consider the bill as amended, S. 3014. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, signify by saying nay. No. All right. And Senator Cantwell, you've requested to be listed as a no. In the opinion of the chair, the bill as amended passes. I want to thank all of the members for getting to the business early and for our committee having completed its work. Now, the script says expeditiously, but this is the longest business meeting that we've ever had during my time as chairman. So, I ask unanimous consent that staff be allowed to make technical and conforming changes. There being no other objections, this meeting is adjourned.